Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today we are talking Middle East peace, but more specifically about who will broker such a regional peace as a brand new dynamic in the region begins to pick up speed. For one, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is just finishing his first official contact with Egyptian President Sisi, and this as leaders from Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq now are meeting in Baghdad for an historic summit. Historic not only for its importance, but as it's the first time in decades that an Egyptian head of state has even stepped foot in Iraq. But the three nations so far are agreeing to a number of initiatives, including on economic investments, plans for countering terrorism, and brokering an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
اتفقنا في السابق على مواصلة التنسيق في بعض الملفات الإقليمية الرئيسية كالملف السوري والليبي وكذلك اليمن وفلسطين. نبلور تصور مشترك تجاه هذه القضايا بالتعاون والتنسيق لكي نساعد إخواننا في هذه البلدان على عبور هذه التحديات.
Joining us to discuss is President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, Dr. Ephraim Inbar, and Professor Mark Meirowitz, political analyst, American foreign policy expert, and professor at SUNY's Maritime College. Thank you both so much for being with us. Professor Inbar, I'm actually going to start with you. What are the major reasons that this meeting, that this trilateral summit is so important or momentous? And what changed, really, to bring these three countries together now?
I think the main reason is Iran. Basically, the Egyptians and the Jordanians try to save Iraq from Iranian embrace. And Kadhimi, the prime minister, he's Shiite, but he's identified as pro-Western. And he is trying to limit as much as possible the role of the Iranian militias in his own country. And I would suggest to Mr. Kadhimi to try to make peace first at home before trying to make peace in Yemen or in the Israeli-Palestinian arena.
All right, so if that's the case, if Kadhimi is both pro-Western, but these three countries are also, in a sense, trying to replace the West as the brokers in the Middle East, where does that leave the United States, or for that matter, Russia and China, when it comes to being that broker, when it comes to being that mediator?
Well, I think that we should not exaggerate the role of extra-regional powers. The peace between Israel and Egypt was basically an affair, bilateral affair between Begin and Sadat. That was helped, of course, by President Carter. The peace between Israel and the Emirates, the Abraham Accords, was again a bilateral affair, which was helped very much by the Reagan administration. But the Americans signal that they want to be out of the Middle East. So their role obviously is going to be more limited. While Russia, I don't think, has any appetite for being involved in Iraq. They are involved already in the civil war in Syria. And the Chinese still have only a very modest influence in this region.
All right, Mark, I want to turn to you now. Let's start with your initial reactions, really, to what Professor Inbar just said with respect to the United States taking a step back and with the roles shifting.
It's a tremendous privilege to be on a discussion with Professor Inbar. I agree with everything he said. I'd just like to elaborate on a few of those points. Number one, to answer your first question, I think these states are in a state of desperation, particularly because of Iran and because of many regional issues that they're facing. For example, Egypt has electricity to export. The water crisis is tremendous with the Great Renaissance Dam. They need help with that. They're going to get support on that. So there are a lot of things that they can do together. They call it the New East, the New Levant, and a lot of an EU from the Middle East. That's a good idea. But I go back again, I think, to Professor Inbar's point about Iraq. You know, some see Iraq sort of under the sway of Iran, and Iran really is the key, the glue to this one, just like it's the glue to the Abraham Accords. In this region, Iran looms as the great threat. I should add, though, on China, I actually looked up a little bit on this a little bit more. And, they are making inroads in Israel, of course, on the Belt and Road Initiative, very controversial, but also in these countries as well, where they want to have a global influence. I think the United States, there's a vacuum in the Middle East, Professor Minbar indicated. And look, we're pulling out of Afghanistan. We're pulling out. We're not making commitments. The United States is focused on its existential threat from China, and it is not going to be involved as a peacemaker on the lawn at the White House or anywhere else to make peace in the Middle East, because presidents who have tried to do it in many cases failed, and Biden doesn't want to fail. He wants to push back China, push back Russia. Listen to the summit that he had recently. You'll get the tone of it. He wants predictability and stability, and the place you cannot have predictability and stability is in the Middle East. That's why he's trying to make the nuclear deal with Iran. To sum it up, really, I think, again, the glue here is Iran. I agree with that, with Professor Inbar on that. And Iraq's problems are very fundamental, and I agree with that, too. How do you fix Iraq? How does Iraq become a regional peacemaker when it's, we just had the United States just attacked Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. So Iraq, they have these militias there. So how does Iraq become, it's not even a stable, full state. So at the end of the day, I think this is an ambitious move, but if it proceeds on economics and on issues like that, I think could be very successful. But if it tries to become a regional NATO or a regional security force, I'm not optimistic about it.
Professor Inbar, would you like to add to that? And what do you think in terms of the spreading of stability across the Middle East in the wake of this summit, especially given what Professor Meirowitz just mentioned about Iraq's own instability?
I think that you have a good sense of humor, telling the audience that there is a chance for more stability in the Middle East coming out of Iraq or of any meeting of an Iraqi prime minister with Egypt or Jordan. Jordan is particularly, a small state with little influence in the region. It tries to survive the big waves that are overcoming the Middle East. Egypt has a more immediate problem: how to localize, Gaza and the Muslim Brotherhood. So I don't think Egypt, has any longer the ambitions that it had in the past, to be the hegemonic power in the Middle East. So Egypt tries to fulfill a role in Gaza, which is positive from an Israeli point of view, but maybe some, limited ambitions to regain the status it had in the past, but linking with Iraq, which is hardly a state, is not the right way.
So Egypt especially has been paramount to the brokering of ceasefires and other such agreements between Israel and Hamas. So again, speaking as regional brokers, would they be better mediators in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, and really Israel and other countries, or really just any conflict in the Middle East? Would they be better positioned as a mediator for that than the United States or other Western countries?
I think for some time, the Turks had a media mania. They wanted to be mediators all over the Middle East. I think the Egyptians are more realistic in what kind of roles they can play. Basically, nobody wants really to mediate the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because everybody understands that the Palestinians are not ripe for reaching an agreement with the Zionist movement. They are divided, and there is no use in putting diplomatic efforts in this arena. We just have to be patient. Maybe a new generation of Palestinians will become more conciliatory toward the Jewish state. But in the meantime, the Biden administration and others have basically given up efforts of mediating the conflict, and everybody accepts the Israeli policy of managing the conflict.
Professor Meirowitz, do you agree? Do you think that the United States is essentially giving up? I know you mentioned that they're pulling out, but could it be temporary? Do they have maybe long-term plans to return to the Middle East with some sort of designs of mediation?
I think if you listen carefully to President Biden, even if you listen to President Trump, the United States does not want to be involved in endless wars in the world. It doesn't want to be involved deeply in the quagmire of the Middle East. And it is pulling out. And just look at the paradigm of what's going on in Afghanistan. Biden came in and he said, I'm pulling out. I'm pulling out now. Not even September 11th. I'm pulling out now. And, and that is the signal of what the United States wants to focus on. As I said before, the focus of American foreign policy now, very clearly when you saw at the summit, is China and Russia. The only thing that the United States wants to do in the Middle East is have quiet and stability. I agree with you. President Inbar, there's never going to be stability, but there will be hopefully quiet and no conflicts, including no wars between Hamas and Israel. I would say, though, if you look at the communique and the discussion of the three leaders when they presented after the summit, they went into three areas: economic leadership, political cooperation, security and intelligence. And they did mention the Israeli-Palestinian issue, but I have to be very candid. I think that got short shrift, just the same way that when President Trump met with the leaders on the Abraham Accords, they all gave their fealty to the issue, but that is not the issue that glues together these powers. And if they're going to be pragmatic, they can make it happen. I learned in my politics class, and Professor Inbar might have taught this course, cui bono, who benefits? So what's the benefit here? The benefit is very significant to the three powers to get together. Why? You can have a transit hub, you can have a railway, you can have electricity, pipelines, water, agriculture, industry. On those points, they can work together, and that's actually a good thing. But if they're going to try to become a political force in the Middle East, you're taking three misshaped Lego pieces and trying to put them together. They're not going to fit together properly as an alliance, but they might have some maybe short-term or immediate goals that they can work on together. But the United States is out of the picture, which is why I think, to say what I said before, I think they're in a desperate situation and they got to get together and do some of this because the U.S. is out of there, that is a big issue.
So can you speak maybe to the differences in the approach, in the ideology, in the planned outcome of the United States' efforts in the Middle East versus what will likely come out of this summit?
I mean, the United States in the Middle East is a chapter which closed. I mean, if you look at if you look actually at the meetings between Yair Lapid and Secretary Blinken, and also the very cordial meetings with other representatives, Rivlin and others, with leaders of the United States wants to continue to have peace and stability and quiet in the Middle East. It doesn't want any wars and conflicts. Why? Because they're distracting. The days of the focus where the peace process in the Middle East is the biggest issue. I have to say, domestic politics plays a role here because the Democrats in Congress are pushing Biden to pursue the Israeli-Palestinian issue. But if you listen to the tone of the bilateral discussions, I think that may be something on it, but the key issue in the Middle East is the U.S. getting out, and also why does the U.S. pursue the Iran nuclear deal? Because it thinks that it will quiet the situation with Iran with that deal. And I think they're wrong about that. But again, U.S. policy in the Middle East is radically different than what it was. It's letting the Abraham Accords remain. These powers are getting together. And I go back again to Professor Inbar's very good point at the outset, where it's Iran that is really the coalescing force among all these powers. They're desperate. They need to get together because they're fearful of what's going to happen, and they're not sure that the United States is going to be there in the Middle East with them in the future.
Professor Inbar, do you think that this trilateral summit will be more successful? And maybe you can define you could give us your definition of what success looks like, but do you think that the summit will be more successful than the United States or other Western powers when it comes to brokering different deals in the Middle East, be it through their being more pragmatic or maybe just having a better feel for the situation on the ground?
First of all, we should remember this is not the first trilateral meeting. They had a meeting in 2019, if I'm correct. And it didn't, nothing transpired of this meeting. And I'm very doubtful if we'll see anything that has influence over the larger region from this meeting. What maybe this meeting could be a contributing factor is to make greater political clout of the prime minister, and maybe this will encourage him to put his house in order. And this is basically a country, a state with no monopoly over use of force. There are militias there, and in order to be a state, you have to centralize the use of force. As long as government of Kadima or any other Iraqi government is not able to control all people with the guns in their own country, the country will continue to be under the orbit of Iran, particularly if the Iranian militias are active there. So the first building block of any serious regional alliance is to have an Iraqi state.
So what needs to happen for that to happen? How far away are we from having an Iraqi state? And what role is Iran playing in maybe breaking this summit up or interfering with their goals?
Iran has a very sophisticated strategy using proxies, and it established a military presence in Iraq via its proxies, using the pretext of fighting ISIS, a Sunni radical force. And this is how they build up their force in Iraq, a Shiite force. And as long as Iranians have militias there that are subservient to Tehran rather than to Baghdad, we'll continue to see a country that is divided into different sectors by different militias with no central control, no central authority.
So, Professor Meirowitz, similar question. Do you see this new summit, this new cooperation between these three countries? They mentioned security, regional security issues as being in their top list of concerns. Do you think that maybe they'll work to oust Iranian proxies from Iraq?
Call that in the Don Quixote's The Impossible Dream. I totally agree with Professor Inbar on what he's saying. I mean, some have even said that Iraq is a puppet state of Iran. I mean, it is an unstable state, clearly. You also have Kurdistan. We didn't talk about that. But the fact of the matter is that is absolutely correct. Iran holds sway over Iraq. As long as that's the case, then it's not an independent actor. Now, when you look at the communique, they talk about, of the summit, they talk about helping their brothers in Syria, Libya, and Yemen, helping the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I think that Professor Inbar's point is spot on in the sense that, you have to fix it. Sort of the Richard Haas's book, Foreign Policy Begins at Home. You have to fix your home front first before you start projecting power. That's why I say when they talk about the New East or the New Levant, this is what they're talking about, there may be these limited trilateral, bilateral arrangements on economics and so forth, which could be very helpful to the region. But I want to turn back to the nuclear deal again. And this is what I believe is a very important point. As long as the United States is not able to pursue a wider arrangement with Iran to prevent it from doing all the things that we've been talking about, which is projecting these militias and proxies throughout the Middle East to cause instability, war, and violence, Hamas, Hezbollah, you name it, Syria, Iraq, they're in the entire region creating instability. If we're just going to do a nuclear deal with them and that's it, which is already flawed, then I think the region is in very, very big trouble. If that's the U.S. imprint, we're going to do a deal, and we're probably going to do the deal. And then we're out of there. We do the deal. We monitor this deal, which is not even a good deal. And we're not going to pursue the rest of it and give you relief on sanctions and maybe give you back some money so you can fund all this. I think you're going to still see this instability because you do need another player involved.
Well, so that's my next question. Are you saying that basically as long as the United States is willing to work with Iran, as long as Tehran has proxies and they're continuing that war on that front, nothing will work? There's no summit, there's no conglomeration or cooperation in the Middle East that has a high chance of success?
Well, the basic facts are Jordan and Egypt are poor. Jordan and Egypt are not going to send any forces to fight the Iranian militias. And as a result, the Iraqis are to themselves. And they have to fix their house in order, to put their house in order, unless there is political will in Iraq to oust the Iranian militias, and it may need a civil war to do that. Nothing is going to change. Kadhimi tries to, the prime minister of Iraq tries to mobilize the support of the Arab world to defend his country against Iranian influence, but this is not enough. You have to fight the proxies with arms. Words, the Egyptians and the Jordanians tell the Iraqis, we are behind you, but they'll stay behind them. And they will not take any real position to help Kadhimi.
All right, well, I think we can all agree that more war is not an outcome that we are hoping for. So we can hope that there will be some sort of success that comes out of this, that Iran will not be able to continue its malign activities. In any case, thank you so much, Professor Mark Meirowitz and Professor Ephraim Inbar, for joining us. You guys were absolutely amazing, and it was a pleasure to have you. I'm Aaron Porras, and please, everyone, tune in next time on Insider for more on everything Israel. If there's a topic that you would like us to cover next, let us know about it in the comment sections online. And finally, for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and ILTV.tv channels. Thank you so much. Be well. We'll see you soon.